did Sega do Jurassic Park better than any other console on the Genesis? Well, we've got 3 games to look at today. One where tension and atmosphere nearly trumped its own gameplay, a sequel that went so hard in the opposite direction that it doesn't even feel like it's from the same developer, and one that most people probably didn't even know existed for reasons that we'll get into. So hold on to your butts, because we're about to see if these Jurassic Park games still have some teeth to them. Hey guys, welcome back. And if you were like me, then you were way into Jurassic Park when you were a kid. And if you had any console at the time, you were pretty much surrounded by tons of Jurassic Park games to play. And each console had their own interesting takes on the franchise. Some good, some not so good. But did the Genesis come out ahead with the best trio of Jurassic Park games out there? Well, put on your favorite dinosaur pajamas, because we're going to get into that right now. So let's just go in chronological order with these, which of course means that Jurassic Park is up first. This one was actually developed concurrently with the film, but there was just one problem. Blue Sky Software, the studio behind Vector Man, didn't have a finished movie to work from here. But they did have stuff like production assets, concept art, a $75,000 Velociraptor puppet, and of course, Michael Crichton's novel, which will actually be important later. So how did we even get here? Because Sega wasn't generally known for having the big movie licenses back then, at least not too often. That was usually Acclaim and Activision's territory. And they did both bid for the Genesis rights to Jurassic Park, and they ended up losing. Sega, of course, ended up winning the license and then handed it over to Blue Sky, giving them access to Silicon Graphics computers, the same technology that was used to render the film's CGI dinosaurs. And all of this was at Sega's new development facility. But at the very least, you could see that Sega was really taking the license seriously, and they were spending a butt ton of money on it. The game ended up shipping in August of 1993 and was the first game ever to receive a rating under Sega's new rating system, coming in at GA for general audiences. And while I'm sure that a lot of Genesis kids would have loved to have seen a more violent Jurassic Park game, Sega though obviously wanted this in as many homes as possible, and it worked for them because this thing sold like gangbusters. The game gives you the choice to play as either Dr. Grant or the Velociraptor, which just happened to be the game's biggest selling point. Not only did you get a standard run-and-gun platformer with Grant, but you could also play a faster, more action-focused game as the Raptor. It's the same island and basically the same stages, but just a completely different experience. Grant's campaign is a side-scrolling platformer with a little bit of survival horror built into it. You have limited ammo for pretty much everything except your basic dart gun, enemies take multiple hits to take down, and some can only be hurt by specific weapons. There was also a big thing about how the dinosaur AI was supposed to react differently to you every single time you played. But really only the raptors show any sort of nuance in trying to get to you. The rest of the dinos don't really do too much. They just kind of stand around and either spit at you or jump at you occasionally. But I think what they were actually talking about was how the game tried to make you feel like you were being hunted by the velociraptors at times. There's several sections in the game where the raptors are actually chasing you and you're just kind of scrambling to get away from them. There's also one point where they try to trick you into thinking that they're dead and then they surround you. That's really neat. And of course the T-Rex sections were always super tense anytime they blasted through the wall trying to get to you. And since it was basically just a giant head thrashing around, the game would usually make you figure out a way around it since you couldn't actually kill it. Plus, one bite from it would turn you into a floating hat. Grant's campaign is definitely the more fleshed out of the two, with more intricate stages involving stuff like pushing buttons and manipulating the environment to escape the raptors. The Raptor campaign, though, is shorter and faster and plays completely differently. There's no weapons or anything like that because everything's close range. You'll just be biting and clawing your way at anything that's in front of you. You're of course faster than Grant, you can jump higher, and you can instantly kill the enemies that are in the stages now. The trade-off with all this is that it's much more awkward controlling the Raptor and getting him through these stages than it was with Grant. And that's especially true when you have to platform with this big boy, which you do several times. Still though, it's 5 levels of a completely different game on the same cartridge. It made you feel like you were getting 2 games in one. Also, the 2 campaigns do this neat thing where they actually mirror each other. Grant's of course trying to escape while the raptor is trying to catch him. And at the end of most of the raptor levels, you're actually chasing Grant off into the next level. It's a cool little attention to detail, and I love stuff like that in games. But there's a few problems with the game, and probably the first and foremost is the game's difficulty, because it's a really punishing game. The game gives you 3 lives and no checkpoints within the levels, though you do at least get a password so you can continue later. But you're pretty much getting beat down constantly in them, since the dinos are just ruthless. Even the ones that are just standing around can occasionally make you regret ever getting too close to them. It also doesn't help that the game doesn't really have very good controls, which wouldn't be too bad, except the game's putting you in stages that it wants you to jump around in constantly. Of course, the game has fall damage too, so long falls will kill you instantly, and trust me, that's gonna happen more than a few times thanks to the game's blind jumps. And I gotta give a special shout out to the 3rd level, which is the river. And if you remember anything about the advertising for this game back then, this part was actually a big selling point because it was in the book and not in the movie. But that was mostly due to the fact that the book was primarily what Blue Sky had to work with since the movie wasn't finished yet. But anyway, this is probably the level where most players hit a wall, mostly because of the crazy amount of blind falls that you take getting through this maze of one-hit deaths. Also, one of the game's bigger problems is more of a technical issue, since this game has some of the worst slowdown that I've ever seen on the Genesis. In most levels, regardless of if you're Grant or the Raptor, you'll be playing in slow motion, and the controls in this game ain't the best to begin with, so trying to make precise jumps when the game's slogging away at half the frame rate will make you dig your nails into the Genesis controller. This is something that affects the entire game, and it's something you can either deal with or you can't. But if you can, then Jurassic Park on the Genesis is a genuinely impressive game for 1993. The dual campaign structure was such a cool idea back then that it basically sold the game on its own. And while I think that most kids that played it back then had a good time with it, a lot of game reviewers at the time though did not. One called it a game that grates, bores, and frustrates despite its technical quality. I mean, that's not entirely wrong, it is frustrating, but I mean, I still liked it. The Raptor campaign alone is worth the price of entry. Playing as the Predator instead of the Prey in 1993 was a genuinely cool concept, and it still is. If you can get past the slowdown and some of the frustrating controls, especially with the Raptor, this is a great trip to everyone's favorite dino-infested island. So when your Jurassic Park game sells 250,000 copies in just the first week, Sega's gonna want a sequel, and pretty fast. The development schedule for Rampage Edition here was just 6 to 8 months, roughly half of what the original took. The core team at Blue Sky was brought back, a new game engine was built from scratch, and many of the original art assets were recycled or just touched up. The result is a game that's simultaneously more ambitious than its predecessor and less polished. The game shipped in October of 1994 to coincide with Jurassic Park's home video release, and this is something that I totally forgot. Like when a blockbuster movie got released on VHS a year later, and it was like a really big deal. But anyway, obviously the timing for this release was very deliberate, and the development timeline for the game reflects that as well. So what's it like actually playing this game? Well, the most significant change from the original is that this one's a much more violent and action-oriented game. The first game's strict no-killing dinos policy is just out the window here. Rampage Edition decided to skip the general audience's rating and shipped with an MA13 rating this time. And I'm just gonna take a guess here, but when you burn a dinosaur alive with a flamethrower or just blast some dude in the face with a shotgun, that probably made the rating go up a little bit. Obviously, this was a significant escalation in violence from just the tranquilizer darts in the first game, but it's kind of weird because it wasn't like the first game really needed the violence. It sold really well, but someone at Sega looked at that original game's commercial success and decided what it needed was a flamethrower, and I guess they're not entirely wrong. The structure of the game is pretty similar to the original, but with a few changes here and there. Grant's campaign is 6 levels now, and 3 of them are selectable from the start in any order, with the remaining levels unlocking as you complete them. And that non-linear opening is actually really cool, because it's never a bad thing to be able to choose your path through a game. The other big change is that, as mentioned, this is a full-on run-and-gun action game now. Gone is all that slow-paced platforming and pushing buttons from the first game, and here it's been replaced with a much faster pace, with enemies all over the stages for you to shoot in the face with your arsenal that's better suited for a small army. And since Grant's now just a full-on action hero, he can also ride dinosaurs across certain sections of the game, like riding a Gallimimus across the savannah, being carried against your will by a bunch of pterodons, and even busting through some jungle ruins on top of a Triceratops. It's just crazy how different this game feels from the original, especially with stuff like this. The Raptor campaign, of course, returns, and this time it's literally just using the same layouts from Grant's stages instead of changing it to better suit the Raptor like the first game did. And that creates some problems, because it kind of feels like some areas just had the Raptor jammed into it without much thought on how the stage actually plays. The game does try to offset that by giving the Raptor an honest-to-God double-jump spin attack that can take down a damn attack chopper, and also adds Raptor Rage mode, where if you collect enough crates scattered through the levels, the screen turns red, and the Raptor gets really mad, and the enemies die on contact, so it's basically just an invincibility mode. But really, that 8-month development cycle shows up in a lot of ways. Some levels just run on way too long and wear out their welcome before they end. Like riding a dinosaur across the savannah is really cool, but it just goes on and on, to the point where I just thought I was doing something wrong. You know how levels loop in on themselves unless you do something specific? Here, you just gotta make it to the end and then it ends suddenly. The rafting stage returns as well and does the exact same thing, where it just doesn't seem like it ever wants to end. In fact, it goes through an entire day and night cycle before it does actually end. Also, even though the controls have been tightened up, like a lot, it still kind of feels clunky and I can't really put my finger on as to why. But for me, I just think I kind of like the slower pace of the original game, the resource management, and the legit tension that some of the stages had. It just felt closer to how the movie felt. Rampage Edition, though, replaced pretty much all of that with straightforward action and a bigger arsenal, which does play faster and can be more satisfying, but it feels like it lost something in the translation somewhere. Rampage Edition is the middle child of the Genesis Jurassic Park trilogy. It's all gas and no brakes here, and definitely more violent than the original was. But at the same time, it's also less polished and less distinctive. Being able to ride some dinos and pulverize an entire army with rocket launchers is still pretty fun though, plus they managed to do all of this with zero slowdown this time, which makes this game feel so much better to play overall. But that compressed development schedule left some real marks on this one. The stages just drag in places where the original didn't, and the whole survival horror vibe that made Grant's campaign in the first game memorable is completely gone. But I guess when you're killing dudes with a raptor that can do a double jump spin attack, I think you know what kind of game you're getting into. It just might not be what you wanted if you were a fan of the original. But I still think it's worth your time if you just wanted a more action-packed Jurassic Park game on the Genesis. In fact, it genuinely feels like it was made for those kids who were just too impatient for the original. But if you do want to play this one, maybe just go into it knowing that it's a faster and rougher version of the first game rather than a refinement. After Rampage Edition, Sega moved over to a completely different developer and made something that shares almost nothing with the Blue Sky games except the dinosaurs. And I'm gonna need you to sit down for this one because it came out in September of 1997. Just for a little comparison, the Nintendo 64 had been out for a year by that point. The PlayStation had been out for 2 years. The fact that anyone was making a Genesis game by then was nothing short of a small miracle. But that didn't seem to bother Appaloosa Interactive, the studio behind Echo the Dolphin, since they decided to make one more game for it anyway. Appaloosa themselves is actually an interesting developer to have on the game, since Echo the Dolphin was known for its atmospheric ocean setting, its willingness to be really weird, and also just being way too damn hard. The The Lost World does share some of that DNA. It's a slower paced game than what you'd usually expect from a Jurassic Park game. It looks incredible, and there's a lot of content to play through. The game is technically based on both Crichton's 1995 novel The Lost World and the 1997 film, though it plays pretty fast and loose with both of those. You play as an unnamed hunter sent to Isla Sorna by InGen to capture dinosaur specimens while stopping rival poachers from doing the same. There's honestly not much here at all connecting it to the franchise, but in a nice touch, Ian Malcolm's actually available as a second player whenever you play co-op mode. The game itself is viewed from an isometric overhead perspective, dividing the island into hub areas, each containing several missions that you can tackle in any order, plus a mandatory boss level at the end of each site before you can actually advance. That's 19 missions total, and these are not short levels. That's just a crazy amount of content for a game that came out this late for the Genesis. You start the game with 3 weapons, a taser, a tranquilizer gun, and a shotgun. More weapons do become available as you play, including stuff like machine guns, grenades, and even landmines. You can even find vehicles to drive around in some of the maps, though they don't really control very well, and plus they explode in just a few hits. The different missions all have different objectives though. Some are pretty simple, like just make it to a certain location, or rescue someone that's lost, or more advanced stuff like activate sensors that are around a map. The variety in the objectives is one of the game's big highlights and keeps the 19 missions from blurring into each other, because otherwise this would just be a generic top-down shooter that goes on way too long. And if you could count on Appaloosa to do one thing, they could make a really nice looking game. Game Informer at the time even praised the graphics specifically for pushing the Genesis to its limits, and certain levels like this T-Rex pursuit in a sidecar looks ridiculously good for a Genesis game. But as with all of these Genesis Jurassic Park games, there are some problems, and the biggest one here are the controls. Your character moves kind of slow with hardly any sense of urgency, and that makes lining up shots or just trying to get away from other dinos really hard. Especially since the dinosaurs just love to rush directly at you, so you'll get a ton of contact damage while you're just trying to line up a shot. Generally, it's just really hard not to take damage in this game, and I think the developers knew that since health packs are kind of strewn all over the place. It's not unplayable by any means, but it definitely needs a little bit more patience than the previous games on the system. Also, for as good as this game looks, there's only like 2 settings in the entire game, the jungle and the caves. And for a game this long, you really need a bit more visual variety to break these long-ass stages up. The co-op mode does help a lot though, and it's the version of the game that tends to be more fondly remembered by kids that played it back then. 2 players navigating the island goes a long way in making the game more playable, since it's much faster to tag team all the stuff that's running at you. And personally, I just think it's more fun to play a top-down shooter with another person. The Lost World on the Genesis ended up being one of the last commercially released games in North America, and despite that, Appaloosa made a complete 19-level game for a console that was basically commercially finished. But even with that, it's still the hardest of the 3 to recommend. If you want a fast, arcade-style dinosaur action game, this ain't it. But if you want a more methodical, atmospheric, mission-based game with co-op, then this might be your jam. But I could totally see a lot of people finding this game just too frustrating or plotting to be worth their time, especially by yourself. But I still think it's a pretty cool game to check out, even if you're just curious or didn't even know it existed in the first place. Also, any game that lets the second player play as Jeff Goldblum gets some serious points in my book. So the question is, did the Genesis do Jurassic Park better? And I think the honest answer is, for 2 of those 3 games, yeah, it actually did. The original Blue Sky game is one of the coolest licensed platformers from back then, even with its issues. The dual campaign, the awesome atmosphere and tension of Grant's campaign, it's all awesome design decisions that most developers with a massive license like Jurassic Park would have never risked. Rampage Edition is rougher and faster and doesn't really hold up against its predecessor, but you can at least spin jump as a raptor, and that counts for something. And The Lost World is just its own thing entirely, a late-era Genesis game that arrived too late to be discovered by most people, even the people that still owned a Genesis. But what those three games together tell you is that the Genesis Jurassic Park library had more range, more ambition, and more thought put behind it than Jurassic Park got on any other console. The Super Nintendo games are pretty fun and unique, but if you want two playable characters, a raptor campaign, a flamethrower, raptor rage mode, and a $75,000 Velociraptor puppet used as a production asset, the Genesis is the only place where you can go for that. And that's gonna do it for me this week, guys. That's a lot of Jurassic Park, and I think if you owned a Genesis, then you should have been pretty happy with what you had back then. But let me know in the comments below which was your favorite, or even least favorite. And while you're at it, hit that like button so more folks can see this as well. Also, feel free to subscribe for more videos from this prehistoric dude talking about some dumb licensed games. Either way though, thanks for watching. Oh, and you can stop holding onto your butts now.